Her billionaire husband left her broke after divorce. Her $300 food truck changed her life. The divorce agreement slid across the glass table, and the number waiting for Jada Alden was not small, not insulting, not negotiable. It was $0. 00. Across from her, Victor Channing sat in an elegant black suit, calm as a man signing for a bottle of wine, while Audrey Blythe leaned beside him in a soft white dress, her smile gentle enough for cameras and cruel enough for the room. Jada sat in a vivid red power dress that made the whole office look colder, and for one sharp second, the three of them looked like a painting of everything marriage was never supposed to become. Red for the woman who had built the fire, black for the man who had claimed the empire, white for the woman who had mistaken possession for victory. Then the senior lawyer explained the clause. Because the restaurant group had been formed under Victor's holding company before the marriage amendment was filed, because Jada's recipes had been categorized as marital operational contributions instead of intellectual property, because every flagship lease, every brand license, every investor document carried Victor's name, Jada's share was legally reduced to nothing. Nothing from the 5 restaurants whose menus she had created. Nothing from the sauces she had perfected after midnight. Nothing from the staff training system she had written by hand. Nothing from the tasting room that had earned Victor his first major review. Victor did not raise his voice. That was what made it uglier. He simply adjusted one cuff and said the agreement was clean, efficient, and final. Audrey lowered her eyes, as if she were embarrassed, but Jada saw the little curve at the corner of her mouth. The food blogger, who could not hold a chef's knife properly, was already imagining herself photographed in Jada's kitchen whites, standing beneath lights she had not earned. The senior lawyer kept talking, but Jada stopped listening to the performance and started listening to the math. Victor had not just betrayed her with another woman. He had studied the structure of her life, found the weakest legal seam, and pulled until the whole thing opened. He wanted her shocked. He wanted tears. He wanted the satisfaction of watching a brilliant woman discover that brilliance did not protect her from paperwork. But Jada gave him none of that. Her eyes moved once from the $0. 00 to Victor's face, then to Audrey's white dress, then back to the contract. No trembling mouth. No public collapse. No plea for mercy from a man who had already priced her out of her own work. Inside her, something did break, but not in the way Victor expected. It broke cleanly, like a lock snapping open. She remembered every recipe he thought belonged to him. She remembered every supplier who had trusted her palate, every line cook who had followed her timing, every investor dinner saved, because she changed a dish in 6 minutes flat. The company could keep the marble floors. Victor could keep the name on the building. Audrey could keep smiling at a throne built over a stove she did not understand. Jada still had the one thing none of them had bothered to put in the contract. She had the mind that made the empire taste like something. The senior lawyer pushed another page forward and said Victor was prepared to offer a small transitional payment as a gesture of goodwill. Victor nodded, as if generosity looked noble after theft. Audrey whispered that it was more than fair. Jada slowly touched the diamond ring on her finger. For 8 years, that ring had been displayed at galas beside tasting menus, ribbon cuttings, charity dinners, and magazine profiles, where Victor spoke about vision, while Jada stood half a step behind him. She had once believed the ring meant partnership. Now she understood it had been the first elegant receipt. She slid it off. The room held its breath. Victor's face sharpened, with expectation, perhaps thinking she would return it to him like a wounded wife returning a symbol of love. Jada did not look at him. She tossed the ring to the senior lawyer, and it landed near the edge of the contract, with a small, expensive sound. "Use that for the filing fees," she said. The lawyer froze. Audrey's smile vanished for half a second. Victor blinked, and that tiny loss of rhythm told Jada more than any apology could have. She stood, gathered no papers, accepted no check, and left the $0. 00 page lying on the glass like evidence. At the door, Victor finally spoke her name, not with regret, but with irritation, as if she had ruined the ending he had rehearsed. Jada turned just enough for him to see the calm in her face. "You kept the restaurants," she said. "Now try running them." Then she walked out, With no car waiting, no assistant calling, no company account, and exactly $300 in cash inside her purse. Behind her, the office remained silent. Ahead of her, the city was loud, expensive, indifferent, and wide open. For the first time in years, Jada Alden owned nothing that Victor Channing could touch. And that made her dangerous. Jada did not slow down until the elevator doors closed behind her. Only then did she let the silence press in. The mirrored walls reflected the red dress Victor had always called too bold for meetings, the dress he liked only when cameras were watching and donors needed to believe his wife was part of the brand. Now, under the elevator's flat white light, the color looked less like fashion and more like a warning. Her left hand felt strangely light, without the ring. Not empty. Light. There was a difference. By the time she reached the lobby, the senior lawyer's office was already 30 floors above her, sealed behind glass and polished wood, probably filling itself with Victor's version of the story. He would say she had been emotional. He would say she had refused a fair settlement. He would say he had tried to be generous. Men like Victor did not just steal the house and the business. They tried to steal the narrative before anyone could ask who built the foundation. Jada stepped onto the sidewalk, with her purse under one arm and no destination in mind. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Victor's office, not from Victor himself, confirmed that her company access had been terminated, her executive card frozen, and her apartment entry code scheduled for deactivation by 6 p.m. The precision almost made her smile. 8 years of marriage, 5 restaurants, 2 tasting menus that had changed his fortune, and he had ended her life by administrative sequence. Card frozen. Code removed. Name deleted. She opened her purse and counted the money slowly. 3 $100 bills, folded clean from the emergency pocket she had kept for farmers markets and late-night supplier runs. $300. That was what remained after the restaurants, the savings, the penthouse, the shared accounts, the investment structure, the wine cellar, and the dining empire, with her fingerprints all over its invisible bones. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, and for one sharp second, old habit told her to step toward it. Then the driver looked past her, searching for someone, with permission to be picked up. Jada kept walking. 2 blocks later, she stopped in front of the flagship restaurant she had once opened, before sunrise and closed after midnight. Through the glass, the dining room looked perfect. White tablecloths, brass lamps, orchids on the host's stand, Victor's name engraved near the entrance. Not hers. Never hers. Inside, a server adjusted silverware according to the training manual Jada had written. A line cook crossed the back hallway carrying prep containers labeled in her handwriting. The place still moved on her rhythm, even while the paperwork said she had no claim to it. That was the cruelty of it. The world did not always collapse when you were erased. Sometimes it kept functioning on the systems you created, pretending you had never existed. Jada stood there for exactly 11 seconds, long enough to feel the wound, not long enough to worship it. Then she turned away. She bought a plain coffee from a street cart, not because she wanted it, but because warm paper in her hand felt like proof that she could still choose something. The vendor asked if she wanted sugar. She almost said no, then changed her mind. 1 packet, she said. A small decision. A human one. At the corner, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo Audrey had posted. White dress, soft smile, caption about new beginnings in the culinary world. In the background, Jada could see the tasting kitchen. Her tasting kitchen. Audrey was holding a chef's knife like a prop, fingers placed so poorly that any real cook would have flinched. Jada stared at the photo until the anger cooled into something more useful. Audrey wanted applause. Victor wanted obedience. The city wanted lunch. Only one of those facts mattered. Jada deleted the message thread from Victor's office, blocked the restaurant group's public relations number, and walked toward the older commercial district, where delivery trucks idled behind cafes and small vendors survived, without marble floors. She did not know yet what she would build. She only knew what she would never do again. She would never let a man put his name on her hunger, her labor, or her gift. As the afternoon traffic roared around her, Jada folded the $300 back into her purse like a seed, not a defeat. The empire behind her had chandeliers, investors, lawyers, and Audrey's white dress waiting at the center of it. Jada had no office, no car, no ring, and no safety net. But she had her hands. She had her memory. She had a palate sharp enough to turn scraps into desire. And for the first time, since marrying Victor Channing, every step she took belonged only to her. The older commercial district smelled like diesel, wet cardboard, fryer oil, and survival. Jada walked past loading bays, shuttered lunch counters, and narrow storefronts, with hand-painted signs, until she reached a fenced lot behind a closed sandwich shop, where 3 food trucks sat under faded tarps like tired animals waiting for one more chance. The building manager did not ask for her story. He only looked at her red dress, her clean posture, her empty ring finger, and the $300 she placed on the clipboard between them. The truck he offered her was the cheapest one on the lot, a dented silver box, with a cracked service window, a burner that clicked 6 times before catching, and an old logo ghosted beneath peeling paint. It had no glamour. It had no promise. It had a sink, a flat top, 2 storage shelves, and a generator that sounded like it had survived several bad decisions. $300 covers the first week, the building manager said. After that, cash only. Jada nodded once. Then I'll make the first week count. When he handed her the key, it was warm from his palm and almost too small for the weight it carried. She stepped inside the truck and closed the door behind her. The world went quiet in a different way than the lawyer's office had been quiet. There, silence had been polished and cruel. Here, it was greasy, cramped, and honest. The floor stuck slightly under her heels. The refrigerator hummed with a tired rattle. Someone had left behind a stack of stained paper trays, 2 cracked squeeze bottles, and a dull knife. That would have embarrassed a beginner. Jada set her purse on the counter and stood still. For the first time all day, there was no Victor watching for weakness, no Audrey smiling for ownership, no lawyer translating betrayal into clauses. There was only metal, dust, old grease, and the smell of a life starting at the bottom. Her hand found the edge of the counter. Then it shook. Not dramatically, not beautifully, just enough to remind her she was still human. She lowered herself onto an overturned milk crate and stared at the $300 receipt the building manager had given her. Paid in full. 1 week. No refunds. The words blurred for a second, and she pressed her thumb hard against the corner of the paper until the feeling passed. She remembered the flagship kitchen the night before its opening, when Victor had gone home at 10 p.m. and she had stayed until 3:17 a.m. Fixing a sauce that refused to hold. She remembered burning her wrist on a pan handle, wrapping it with a towel, and serving the tasting menu anyway, because failure had not been an option. She remembered Victor telling a magazine that success came from his instinct for experience, while Jada stood behind the photographer with flour on her sleeve. In the truck, alone, the wound finally arrived, without an audience. She bent forward, elbows on knees, and let one silent breath break unevenly in her chest. That was all she allowed it. 1 breath for the marriage. 1 breath for the theft. 1 breath for the woman she had been, when she believed loyalty would be recognized, without a contract. Then Jada stood up. She took off her heels, placed them neatly beside the door, and began cleaning. She scrubbed the counter until the gray film lifted. She boiled water through the lines, wiped each shelf, tested the flame, sharpened the dull knife against the bottom of a ceramic mug, and tied her hair back with a strip of red ribbon from her purse. By 7:46 p.m., she had written a menu on brown butcher paper using a black marker borrowed from the building manager: braised short rib melt, smoked tomato bisque, crispy herb potatoes, bourbon peach hand pie. Food people understood. Food that did not need chandeliers to feel expensive. She used the remaining coins in her purse and a little credit at a produce stall to buy imperfect tomatoes, discounted herbs, day-old rolls, bruised peaches, and beef trim a butcher was willing to sell cheap, because she knew exactly how to ask. Back in the truck, she turned scraps into structure. Tomato skins became depth. Beef trim became richness. Stale bread became texture. Nothing was wasted, because she had been wasted on a man who thought value lived only in clean ledgers and white tablecloths. Near midnight, the first pot of bisque began to simmer, deep and smoky, filling the truck. with a scent that made the cold metal walls feel less like a cage and more like a beginning. Jada tasted one spoonful, closed her eyes, and adjusted the salt by instinct. Then she smiled for the first time that day, not because she was healed, because the flame was listening. You see, this is the part of the story where most people misunderstand power. They look at Jada Alden inside, that battered food truck, barefoot on a sticky floor, stirring soup under a weak light, and they think she has been reduced. They think Victor Channing won, because he kept the leases, the accounts, the marble dining rooms, the polished brand, and the kind of black suit that makes wealthy men look untouchable even when their hands are dirty with paperwork. But listen closely. Victor did not take everything from Jada. He took everything he knew how to measure. That is a very different thing. Men like Victor are dangerous because they confuse legal control with human capacity. They believe if a name is on a document, the soul of the thing must belong to them. They believe if a woman's labor is not properly credited, then it can be quietly absorbed, repackaged, and handed to someone like Audrey Blythe in a white dress, with a camera-ready smile, and no real understanding of the fire she is standing beside. And that is not just betrayal. That is extraction. Victor did not simply leave Jada broke after divorce. He tried to convince her that being broke meant being finished. That was the psychological trap. He wanted her to walk out of that office thinking the number $0. 00 was a verdict on her worth, not a line item on a document written by people who had never tasted what she could create from almost nothing. Tell me, what would you do if someone took the building you kept alive, erased your name from the door, and then offered you pity like it was generosity? Would you scream? Would you beg? Would you stand there trying to prove your value to people who had already decided to profit from pretending you had none? Jada did something colder. She stopped auditioning for respect. That is why her silence scares Victor more than anger ever could. Anger would have given him a scene to control. Tears would have given Audrey a performance to judge. But calculation? Calm. A woman quietly converting humiliation into strategy? That is the kind of thing arrogant people do not recognize until it is already too late. Because Jada's gift was never just cooking. It was pattern recognition. It was pressure management. It was knowing exactly how long bitterness can simmer before it becomes depth. She understood ingredients, yes, but she also understood people. She understood that wealthy clients did not return to Victor's restaurants because of the chandeliers. They returned because something on the plate made them feel seen, surprised, remembered. That was Jada. That had always been Jada. Victor thought he owned the empire because he owned the shell. Audrey thought she had inherited status because she had been seated near the crown. But neither of them understood the engine. And now the engine was parked behind a closed sandwich shop, inside a dented silver truck, turning bruised peaches and day-old bread into something that could make strangers stop mid-bite. That is the quiet danger of a person who has nothing left to lose except the lie they were living inside. Once Jada stopped protecting Victor's image, she did not have to destroy him. Reality would do that slowly, publicly, and with excellent timing. So when that first pot of smoked tomato bisque filled the truck near midnight, it was not just dinner. It was evidence. Evidence that talent survives eviction. Evidence that dignity can stand barefoot on a metal floor and still be royal. Evidence that a woman in a red dress can lose the empire on paper and still carry the recipe for its resurrection in her hands. And if Victor had been wise, he would have felt afraid the moment Jada walked out, without taking his money. Because a woman who refuses hush money is not leaving empty-handed. She is leaving with the truth, and she is no longer interested in making it comfortable for anyone. By 10:58 the next morning, Jada had the service window open, the burner steady, and the brown butcher paper menu taped to the side of the truck with 2 strips of silver tape. No logo, no investor backing, no polished launch campaign. Just a dented silver truck behind a closed sandwich shop, and a woman in a vivid red dress moving, with the kind of precision that made even a cramped kitchen feel disciplined. The first customer was a tired office worker who had followed the smell of smoked tomato bisque from half a block away. He ordered carefully, as if worried the food might cost more than his lunch break could afford. Jada handed him a paper bowl, a grilled roll brushed with herb butter, and no explanation. He took one bite, while standing near the curb. Then he stopped walking. That was the first sign. Not praise, not a review. Just a man, with a plastic spoon in his hand, suddenly silent because his mouth had understood something, before his brain had words for it. He came back 3 minutes later, and bought 2 more orders for his coworkers. By noon, the line had reached the alley. A delivery driver ordered crispy herb potatoes, and asked what restaurant she came from. Jada said, "This one." A junior associate, from a nearby firm, tried the short rib melt, then stared at the truck like he had discovered a secret door in the middle of the city. A woman in a tailored coat took one bite of the bourbon peach hand pie, and immediately called someone to say, "Cancel my reservation. I found lunch." Jada did not smile at every compliment. She did not perform surprise. She worked. She folded paper trays, adjusted heat, tasted sauces from the back of a spoon, wiped the counter between orders, and kept the rhythm tight enough to survive the rush. By 1:37 p.m., she had sold out of everything except 6 hand pies. By 1:42 p.m., those were gone too. The old refrigerator rattled like applause. That night, someone posted a short video of the food truck, with the caption, "No sign, no tables, best thing I have eaten downtown all year." By morning, the clip had spread across local food pages. People began asking where the truck would be parked. Jada answered with one simple post from a new account. Same place. Noon. Until sold out. She did not mention Victor. She did not mention Audrey. She did not accuse anyone of theft. That restraint made the story sharper. The city began to fill in the silence on its own. Former customers recognized her face. Former staff recognized her technique. A food critic, who had once praised Victor's flagship restaurant, arrived wearing sunglasses and an expression of professional doubt. He ordered the bisque, the potatoes, and one hand pie. He ate standing under a fire escape, and by the time he finished, his doubt had become something close to embarrassment. "You cooked at Channing," he said. Jada placed another order on the counter and replied, "I cooked everywhere I was needed." It was not denial. It was correction. Within 5 days, the line wrapped around the block. By the 7th day, the building manager raised his eyebrows at the crowd and offered her a second week before she even asked. This time, she paid from a metal cash box that smelled faintly of tomatoes and paper bills. She also changed the menu, not because the first one had failed, but because she understood desire better than repetition. Braised mushroom toast with black pepper cream. Charred corn chowder with chili oil. Brown butter chicken biscuit. Lemon icebox tart in a folded paper sleeve. Food that felt humble until it hit the tongue, then revealed the hand of someone trained to make luxury behave. The truck became a rumor, then a habit, then a destination. People in expensive shoes stood beside bike messengers. Assistants picked up orders for executives, who pretended they had discovered her first. Investors came without appointments. Reporters came with cameras. Jada served them all, through the same cracked window, her red dress bright against the steel interior, her voice calm, her standards merciless. Across town, Victor's restaurant still had white tablecloths, brass lamps, and Audrey's soft smile and carefully staged posts. But downtown, where hunger was honest and time was limited, people were beginning to understand the truth. Jada had not opened a food truck because she had fallen. She had opened it because there was no door left between her gift and the street. By the 3rd week, the line outside Jada's truck no longer looked like curiosity. It looked like a reservation list that had escaped onto the sidewalk. At 11:43 a.m., before she had even lifted the service window, 27 people were already waiting under the hard downtown sun, checking watches, answering calls, and pretending they had not rearranged their schedules around a dented silver truck with no printed sign. The same executives who once sent assistants to Victor's dining rooms now stood in person because Jada did not allow priority orders, private holds, or quiet backdoor favors. A managing partner in a charcoal coat waited behind a bike courier. A luxury real estate broker held a place for a client who had flown in from Chicago. A private banker asked if she catered board lunches. Jada looked up from the flat top and said, "Not yet." 2 words, calm and absolute, and somehow the banker accepted them like policy from a 5-star maitre d'. That was what people noticed most. Jada did not chase the city's powerful people. She fed them on her terms. Her menu changed every morning in black marker, built from what she could source cleanly and cook perfectly. Red curry crab roll with pickled fennel. Coffee braised brisket over smoked grits. Crispy potato galette with whipped goat cheese. Blackberry buttermilk panna cotta served in paper cups, so plain they almost felt defiant. Nothing looked desperate. Nothing begged to be photographed, which made everyone photograph it more. The food press arrived expecting a comeback story, but Jada refused to give them the tears they wanted. When an interviewer asked how it felt to lose everything, she corrected the question without raising her voice. "I lost access," she said, "not ability." That line spread faster than any menu item. By evening, it appeared in clips, captions, newsletters, and group chats across the city. People began calling her truck the most impossible seat in town, even though there were no seats. A chef from another restaurant came on his day off and stood in line, with his hands in his jacket pockets, tasting her chowder in silence, before nodding once, with professional respect. A retired critic told the person behind him that the food had memory. An investor offered her a 7-figure expansion deal on the sidewalk, speaking low as if the truck itself were a boardroom. Jada listened, thanked him, and asked for the terms in writing. Not because she was impressed, because this time, every clause would know her name. Behind the window, she kept a small notebook taped beside the register. It held supplier prices, prep times, daily revenue, weather notes, customer patterns, and the exact hour each item sold out. Victor had once teased her for keeping handwritten systems, calling them old-fashioned. Now those systems were turning $300 into leverage. Each day, she paid the truck rent first, ingredients second, taxes third, and herself last. Discipline before celebration. Ownership before applause. When the building manager hinted that a developer wanted the lot, Jada did not panic. She asked for a written notice period, photographed her receipts, and began scouting 2 additional corners before the lunch rush. She had learned the cost of trusting charm over paperwork, and she would never pay that price again. Meanwhile, the crowd grew more polished, more public, harder to ignore. Black cars idled near the curb. Umbrellas appeared even when there was no rain, held by assistants shielding people who once believed waiting was for everyone else. Yet the line did something strange to them. It made them equal. Everyone wanted what Jada had made, and nobody could buy their way ahead of the person before them. Inside the truck, she moved in her red dress like a flame controlled by training, plating food into paper trays, with the same care she had once given porcelain. When the last order sold out at 1:16 p.m., a groan moved through the line. Jada leaned out and said, "Tomorrow." No apology. No performance. Just a promise backed by heat, skill, and a woman who had finally placed her name at the center of her own work. Across the street, a digital billboard flickered with an advertisement for Victor's restaurant group, showing Audrey in white beside a dish she had never created. Nobody in Jada's line looked up. Victor Channing first noticed the silence at the flagship restaurant during a Thursday dinner service, when silence should have been impossible. The dining room still looked expensive. The brass lamps glowed warmly. The white tablecloths had been steamed flat. The wine glasses caught the light in perfect little sparks. Audrey Blythe moved between tables in a white dress, smiling softly whenever she saw a phone, touching the back of a chair here, posing beside a plate there, performing the role of culinary muse with the confidence of someone who had never survived a real dinner rush. But beneath the polished surface, the restaurant had lost its pulse. The kitchen tickets dragged. Sauces arrived too tight or too thin. A halibut dish Jada had once balanced, with citrus, smoke, and restraint now tasted like 3 expensive ingredients trying to impress each other. The short rib course came out glossy and lifeless, rich without depth, heavy without memory. Guests were polite in the way wealthy people become polite when they have already decided not to return. They smiled at servers, folded napkins, declined dessert, and quietly booked lunch at Jada's truck for the next day. Victor stood near the host's stand in his elegant black suit, watching tables empty, before the second seating had fully begun. He told himself it was a slow week. Then the cancellations started coming in clusters. Then the private dining room postponed a corporate tasting. Then a long-time investor sent a message asking why the new menu felt conceptually confused. Audrey blamed the staff. She blamed supply issues. She blamed online jealousy, divorce gossip, and the public's short attention span. During one afternoon tasting, she held up a spoonful of sauce and said it needed to look more viral. The executive chef stared at her for 2 full seconds before lowering his eyes. Nobody corrected her. That was worse than disagreement. Disagreement meant people still believed the room could be saved. This was obedience without faith. Victor felt it then, a thin, cold line moving through his chest. He had kept the restaurants, but not the person who knew why they worked. The first major review arrived on a gray Monday morning. It did not shout. It did not need to. The critic described the flagship as a room still dressed for greatness after the talent has left. He wrote that the new dishes were beautiful from a distance and hollow at the table. He mentioned Audrey's public presence only once, calling it brand theater, where culinary leadership should be. By noon, the review was everywhere. By 3:20 p.m., 2 investors requested an emergency call. By the end of the week, the restaurant was dropped from the next Michelin selection Victor had once carried into every interview like proof of divine selection. He did not yell when the notice came. He sat in his office above the dining room, one hand resting beside the document, the other still wrapped around a glass of untouched water. His fingers trembled just enough to disturb the surface. Audrey entered without knocking, wearing white again, though now the color looked less like innocence and more like bad lighting. She said they could rebrand, pivot, make the story about resilience, maybe launch a limited menu inspired by street food, because that was what people wanted now. Victor looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not the woman he had chosen over Jada, but the cost of choosing flattery over competence. "Can you fix the sauce?" he asked quietly. Audrey blinked. "What? The sauce?" he repeated, his voice almost gone. "Can you fix it?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. That silence answered more clearly than any confession. Downstairs, servers moved through a half-empty dining room, carrying plates built from recipes nobody truly understood. Across town, Jada's truck sold out before the lunch hour ended. Victor opened the sales report, then the cancellation list, then the article again, as if rearranging the evidence might change the verdict. Outside his office window, the sign bearing his name still glowed above the entrance. For years, that glow had made him feel powerful. Now it looked like a light left on in a house already abandoned. The rain began just before noon, sharp and cold enough to turn the financial district into a corridor of black umbrellas, shining pavement, and reflected glass. Victor Channing stepped out of the flagship restaurant, through the front door for the last time, not with an announcement, not with dignity, but with a folded notice of bankruptcy proceedings pressed in his hand, and the taste of failure sitting dry at the back of his throat. Behind him, the brass lamps were dark. The host's stand was empty. A printed sign on the door thanked guests for their years of loyalty and promised a future reopening nobody believed in. His elegant black suit absorbed the rain until the shoulders looked heavy, and for once, no driver was waiting close enough to make the moment disappear. Audrey Blythe stood a few steps behind him in a white dress under a borrowed umbrella, her face tight, with the effort of appearing composed. She had stopped posting 2 days earlier after a comment thread filled, with people asking why the food truck across town tasted more like Victor's empire than Victor's empire did. Now the answer was parked directly across the street. Jada Alden's silver truck glowed beneath a simple awning, its service window open, steam rising into the rain, as if the whole city had gathered around a small, stubborn fire. The line stretched past the corner. Partners from law firms, private bankers, assistants, analysts, critics, and hungry strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, umbrellas touching, shoes wet, voices low with anticipation. No velvet rope, no reservation book, no host deciding who mattered, just people waiting because the food was worth standing in the rain for. Victor stared at the line, and something in his face emptied. It was not the theatrical collapse of a man begging for pity. It was quieter than that, more humiliating. His mouth parted, but the words did not arrive. His right hand tightened around the bankruptcy notice until the paper wrinkled. Audrey whispered that they should leave, but he did not move. Across the street, Jada looked up from the flat top and saw him. She was wearing red beneath her apron, the same kind of red that had made the lawyer's office look cold weeks earlier, but now it did not look like armor. It looked like ownership. Victor crossed when the light changed, rain darkening his hair, his polished shoes splashing through shallow water. The line noticed him, then pretended not to, which was worse. No gasp, no crowd, no dramatic circle opening. Just the mild, merciless indifference of people who had already chosen where they wanted to eat. He reached the service window as Jada handed a tray to an investor waiting patiently with a wet briefcase. "Jada," Victor said, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. She wiped her hands on a clean towel and looked at him with the calm of a chef checking heat. "Victor." Audrey remained behind him, white dress damp at the hem, her expression caught between embarrassment and resentment. Victor swallowed. His fingers shook, not wildly, just enough for Jada to see the truth working through him. "I want to discuss a structure," he said. Even ruined, he still spoke like a contract. "A partnership. Creative authority. Your name visible this time. We can stabilize the group if you come back before the final filings close." Jada listened without interrupting. Rain tapped against the awning. Behind him, someone in line checked the menu board. Someone else murmured that the chowder might sell out. The city kept moving because Victor's emergency was no longer the center of anyone's day. "You do not need me to come back," Jada said. "You need proof that you were not the problem." His jaw tightened. "This is still an opportunity." "No," she said softly. "It is a delayed confession." Audrey looked away. Victor tried again, lower this time. "You know what those restaurants were worth?" Jada reached beside the register and pulled out a small paper receipt, protected under a clip. She placed it on the counter between them. Rain dotted the edge before Victor picked it up. The amount read $300. 00. "That was my first week in this truck," Jada said. $300 bought me a burner that barely worked, a refrigerator that rattled, and 1 week to prove whether I was finished. Victor stared at the receipt, as if it were written in a language he had never respected enough to learn. "With $300, I built a line around the block. With millions, you lost the room." His face went still, not pale in some grand, cinematic way. Just stripped of performance. The black suit, the ruined restaurant, the woman in white behind him, the folded bankruptcy notice in his fist, all of it looked suddenly smaller than the paper tray Jada was filling for the next customer. "So no," she said. "I will not come back to save a company that only valued me after it ran out of ways to use me." She took the receipt back, folded it once, and slipped it into the notebook beside her register. "Next order, please." For a moment, Victor remained at the window, rain sliding down his face, his hand empty now except for the notice he could no longer hide. Then the person behind him stepped forward, not rudely, not loudly, simply hungry. Victor moved aside. Audrey followed without touching his arm. Jada turned back to the grill, adjusted the flame, and placed another order into the rain-warmed hands of the city. By the next morning, the rain had washed the financial district clean, but it had not softened what everyone had seen. The restaurant that once carried Victor Channing's name remained dark behind locked glass, its printed notice curling slightly at the corners. Across the street, Jada Alden arrived, before sunrise with a canvas bag of herbs, a fresh stack of paper trays, and the same red dress beneath a clean apron. She did not pause to stare at the closed doors. She had already given that building enough of her life. Instead, she unlocked the silver truck, checked the burner, counted the cash box, reviewed the supplier invoices, and taped a new menu beside the window. At 9:12 a.m., an investor sent revised terms for a permanent location, this time listing Jada as founder, majority owner, creative director, and final authority over recipes, hiring, and brand use. She read every line twice. She did not smile until she reached the clause protecting her intellectual property. Then she picked up a pen and wrote one note in the margin, stronger. That was the difference now. Jada was no longer grateful to be included in a room. She was designing the room, naming the terms, and deciding who deserved a seat. Victor's collapse did not make her whole. That was important. A person does not heal simply because the one who betrayed them finally loses. Revenge can create noise, but freedom creates silence, and Jada had earned the quieter thing. She had earned a morning where no one could freeze her card, erase her access, rename her work, or hand her place to a woman in white who only understood the camera angle, not the craft. Audrey disappeared from the restaurant group's public pages within a week, not with scandal, but with the ordinary speed of someone who had been useful only while the illusion held. Victor entered negotiations with creditors, sold 2 locations, and stopped appearing in food magazines. When his name did surface, it came attached to restructuring, debt, and phrases that sounded expensive, but meant failure had finally learned paperwork too. Jada did not comment. She had lunch to serve. By noon, the line returned, longer than before, but the energy had changed. People no longer came only because the food was excellent. They came because the truck had become a symbol without ever asking to be one. It stood for every person whose labor had been hidden behind someone else's signature. Every woman told she was lucky to be near power when she had been creating it all along. Every quiet worker who learned the hard way that love, business, and loyalty still need boundaries written in ink. You see, Victor's greatest mistake was not underestimating Jada's cooking. It was underestimating her ability to become unemotional at the exact moment he needed her broken. He thought $0. 00 would define her. She turned $300. 00 into evidence. He thought ownership meant control. She proved ownership means nothing without competence. He thought Audrey could wear the image and inherit the substance. But image is light. Substance is weight. And when the weight came, Audrey could not carry it. So tell me, what is the lesson here? Maybe it is that dignity is not proven in the moment you are praised. It is proven in the moment you are stripped of comfort and still refuse to bargain away your self-respect. Maybe it is that the person behind the scenes is not always replaceable. Sometimes they are the reason the lights stayed on, the sauce held together, the customers returned, and the empire had a heartbeat. Jada did not destroy Victor. She simply stopped saving him. That is the cleanest form of justice. Not shouting, not chasing, not begging the world to understand. Just building something so honest, so precise, and so fully your own that the people who erased you have to stand in line with everyone else and watch your name become the door they can no longer enter. As the first order of the day went out, steam rose from the tray into the cool morning air, and Jada leaned through the window with calm eyes and steady hands. The city was hungry. This time, it knew exactly who had fed it. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.